accordance with Standing Order 106A, the time for member statements has concluded. The Honourable Prime Minister.
Question. Just on a question of privilege, Mr Speaker. After question time last Thursday, Mr Speaker.
Order.
After questions were placed on the notice paper, after that question time, Mr Speaker, the member for Chisholm rose to say he'd been misrepresented by me, wherein I'd quoted his remark about Dr Lawrence. If she had exercised proper judgment, Penny Easton might be still alive today. I also quoted the reported rebuke on the AAP wire of him by his leader, Mr Howard. He rose in the House and said, for the record, I did not say and have not said that Carmen Lawrence caused Penny Easton's death. Mr Speaker, I believe that to be totally untrue. Totally untrue.
Order.
And, Mr Speaker, I ask that it be referred to the Committee of Privileges.
Order. I will look at the issue raised by the Prime Minister and report back at a later date. Questions without notice, the Honourable
my question, Mr Speaker, is to the Minister for Human Services and Health. I ask the Minister, have you been asked to stand aside from the Ministry by the National Secretary of the Australian Labor Party?
The Honourable Minister for Human Services and Health.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure that the Leader of the Opposition would like to know the nature of discussions that go on within the Labor Party. I'm sure he would like to know the answer to those questions, Mr Speaker. I'd like to know the answers to a few questions too. I'd like to know the answers to a few questions, Mr Speaker. I'd like to know, for instance, whether the Leader for the Opposition discussed with Mr Court the establishment of a Royal Commission and its terms of reference, and whether he involved a member for Chisholm in those discussions.
Order. The House will come to order.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to know why Richard Court, the Premier of Western Australia, ignored the advice of his Deputy Leader, the Deputy Leader of the National Party, and the Leader of the Legislative Council, and others who advised the Royal Commission.
The Minister resume her seat for a moment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and that just underlines the hypocrisy of asking it in the first place if you don't want to have some questions put to you. Why did Richard Court act against the advice of his own deputy? He was acting on instructions from the Leader of the Opposition. This Royal Commission was set up on your advice, wasn't it? What discussions did you have with Mr Court? What discussions did you have with Mr Court?
The Minister will just wait for a moment. I again remind members early this week of the provisions of Standing Order 55. If the Minister is not interrupted, she'll conclude her answer far more quickly. The Minister.
Mr Speaker, as I indicated at the outset, there are a lot of questions I'd like to have the answer to. We're not likely to get those answers from anyone over here. We're not likely to get the answers from members opposite. We're not likely to get them in the Royal Commission because Mr Court probably won't appear. Mr Speaker, members
I warned
opposite
the member for O'Connor.
Won't answer the obvious questions, so I don't think they should have the temerity to ask me along those lines.
The Honourable Member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister insist that ministers tell the truth?
The Honourable Prime Minister. Order. Those on my left. Question has been asked and the Prime Minister will be heard.
Mr Speaker,
Order.
Mr Speaker, having myself been here 26 years and never having carried a lies banner around my back, I can say, Mr Speaker, that I insist that in the performance of their public duties and their dealings with the public and with the Parliament, ministers tell the truth and behave honestly at all times. Of course I do.
Order. The Leader of the National Party.
What about not interrupting?
The Leader of the National Party.
Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker.
No, Prime Minister, just wait a moment. The Honourable Member will be out the door if he interjects again. Now, all members are entitled to be heard in this place under the provisions of Standing Order 55 on both sides. The Prime Minister has the call and he will be heard.
Speaker, last week we heard a great deal from the Leader of the Opposition about the truth. He said these things on the AM program. We want to assert the very simple principle that truth is absolute. Truth is supreme. Truth is never disposable in national political life. Then he went on to say, we're talking about the principle of telling the truth in public life. He then enjoins me to adopt that principle. Mr. Speaker, that unctuous hypocrisy was in fact pricked the very afternoon he'd been saying those things, when a journalist had the good memory and perhaps the bad manners to remind him that the member for O'Connor had admitted to being a liar on national television.
Order.
Mr. Speaker,
the House will come to order.
The Leader of the Opposition.
The House will come to order.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition front bench are celebrating the fact that they have a self-confessed liar in their midst. They're celebrating the fact that they have a self-confessed liar in their midst. Mr. Speaker, so when asked about the fact that the member for O'Connor had publicly admitted to lying, he said, oh, that. Well, that occurred. Well, that did occur a very long time ago, and it hasn't occurred while I've been a member of my front bench. Oh, that. Mr. Speaker, so the journalist has the temerity to go on and say, oh, there's a statute of limitations here, is there? Well, there's not a statute of limitation, but I think quite a lot of water has flowed under the bridge. Not the Hindmarch Bridge, of course, Mr. Speaker. Johnny, the bridge. Mr. Speaker, so the point that the news service has made of it, that here he is with this unctuous hypocrisy about the supreme truth, and truth is absolute, saying that the Prime Minister shouldn't have on the front bench someone who he asserts is a liar, but when he has pointed out to him that he has an acknowledged liar, he says, oh, that. No move to take him off the front bench. You see, Mr. Speaker, no move to take him off the front bench. You see, Mr. Speaker, but let me just go to a couple of later instances, recent instances about the Leader of the Opposition's penchant for the truth and his obsessive interest in absolute truth. Mr. Speaker, on AM last week, I'll pick the day now, on the 25th of August, he was asked this by Fran Kelly, what about Carmen Lawrence and John Howard, though? Did you have any hand in urging Richard Court to do this? There's the question. Did you have any hand in urging Richard Court to do this? Howard, I've said to you that the initiative for establishing the Royal Commission came from Court. I've said that to you. There's a very good history to it. But you thought it was a good idea. Look, the Royal Commission's been established. It was his initiative to establish the Royal Commission. Absolutely his initiative. That was his decision. Mr. Speaker.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, on the 18th of April, though, before it was clear we're going to have a Royal Commission, Mr. Liebman asked the member for Chisholm, OK, but Richard Court keeps threatening to call a state parliamentary inquiry, but he hasn't. Doesn't that say something for you? Mr. Waldridge, well, it says that we've been liaising with Richard Court. We've been looking for the best way to do it. So, Mr. Speaker, here's the truth serum addict opposite, talking about how, Mr. Speaker, how he has... let me get these lines because I think they bear repeating. The very simple truth that truth is absolute, truth is supreme. Truth is never disposable. But when asked on a radio program whether the initiative for it came from Court, that it was a good idea, whether he thought it was a good idea, he said, that the Royal Commission had been established, that it came at court's initiative, ignoring the fact that Mr Wooldridge had already said that his opposition had been liaising with Richard Court and looking for the best way to do it. Now we ask you this, John Howard, tell us the truth about this. Tell us the truth. If you can. Mr Speaker, let me go to another recent example of the Leader of the Opposition's penchant for the truth. He said, Mr Speaker, recently, and I quote him, that he rejected the notion that he had associated himself with the the legislation of the Western Australian Liberal Party in respect of industrial relations. He said this at his speech on the 28th of July in Perth. WA is our model. He said he made this clear on that occasion. He said this, and Mr Speaker, and Graham Kirith put the lie to it. He said in the Western Australian newspaper on the 17th of August, rejecting the speculation that the federal coalition was pressuring him to delay or change his industrial plans on the second wave, he said he outlined his proposals to Mr Howard a few weeks ago. Mr Howard has supported the plans wholeheartedly. And we see, Mr Speaker, here is the drift of the press. May 31, draft laws penalise federal...
Look, order. The Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition in this place is given some leeway, and indeed so is the Prime Minister. If you keep on interrupting, you're only giving the opportunity, I'm sure, for the Prime Minister to respond. I ask you to sit there and observe the standing orders. The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, you've got the front page of the Financial Review on the 31st of May. Draft laws penalise federal switch for WA unionists. You then have Kirith plans flawed, says a group. This is the Western Australian Chamber of Commerce saying it's unworkable. Mr Speaker,
Prime Minister has the call and will be heard.
It's very clear that this had been put into the press before the Leader of the Opposition went to his WA party conference, where he repeated his support for it. He then has Mr Kirith saying that he outlined his proposals to Mr Howard. Mr Howard has supported the plans wholeheartedly. Then Mr Howard tells the Federal Parliament, in a personal explanation, he said, the truth is I have said no such thing. I have never associated the federal coalition with any so-called new or second wave industrial laws in Western Australia. This is his claim. Last Friday's West Australian confirmed Mr Kirith's earlier remark. He said, Howard, said what constitutes the second wave are things the coalition feels very strongly about and agrees with wholeheartedly. So, Mr Speaker, you've got the State Minister in Western Australia in the press on the Western Australian on the 25th of August. Howard said what constitutes the second wave are things the coalition feel very strongly about and agree with wholeheartedly. You've got it also in the Western Australian earlier, and then we see it also in the WA Chamber of Commerce and Industry report, which says Mr Howard praised the industrial relations policies instituted by the WA Liberal government and promised to develop a similar environment at the federal level. Now, Mr Speaker, you've got the WA Coalition Minister saying Mr Howard endorsed his policies. You've got the WA Minister rebuking him clearly against the references he's made in the House of Representatives, seeking to distance himself from these remarks. You've got the printed reports of this minister's view in Western Australia, in the Western Australian media. Now, Mr Speaker, here's two instances. One, he says he had no hand, act or part in drafting the terms or being part of the Royal Commission in respect of this petition in Western Australia. His Shadow Attorney-General contradicts him and says that in April they were in touch with the Western Australian government and that they were working on it. You've got him saying in the Federal Parliament